So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it. Hey guys, so before we get into today's video, I want to give a shout out to my boys on YouTube known as the Midnight Mormons. As you may know, I am a friend of the Midnight Mormon show, and with good reason. Carden.
Whew, good thing women don't have the priesthood in our faith, because you would be a handful in the quorum of the 12. Oh! Oh!
Brad.
Obedience is the first principle of heaven, and Gen Z and millennials have not been taught obedience well.
And Kwaku.
You will not win, do you understand me? You will not win, you scum! I will eat you! I'll eat my neighbors.
Are some of the funniest and most down-to-earth faithful saints online today. The show approaches Latter-day Saint culture, doctrine, and current events in ways that break the stuffy boomer mold. Check them out and subscribe. You won't regret it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. Today, I am joined by Stephen Murphy. Stephen, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jacob. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, just so the audience knows, so Stephen runs a YouTube channel called Mormonism with the Murph. I love that name, by the way. It's a good name for your channel.
Yeah, it was a nickname given to me on my mission, because obviously on your mission, you're called by your last name. So my last name is Murphy, but everyone called me Murph or the Murph. So whenever I was thinking of a name for my YouTube channel, I was like, Mormonism with Stephen. I was like, that's kind of lame. So Mormonism with the Murph. It's more catchy.
Hey, no, I love that. And now you have an accent. Obviously, so everybody knows I'm a little sick today, so that's why I sound terrible. But you have an awesome accent. Tell everybody where you're from.
So I'm from Northern Ireland. So it's technically part of the UK. There's Southern Ireland, where they don't pronounce their H's like Robert Boylan, leprechauns, and then Northern Ireland, it's maybe sounds a little bit more similar to Scotland. So some people haven't heard of the accent before, so it's peculiar, and there's different accents throughout the country. But I'm from Northern Ireland.
If we got two Irishmen on either side, one in Southern, one in Northern Ireland, we got to get you guys to have a debate. That could be interesting.
We've kind of come together as allies. You know, there's not many people from Ireland in the bloggernacle or doing YouTube channels, so we're kind of friends.
I was about to say, yeah, you guys probably would have to be. There aren't a lot of Irishmen that are just not a ton of Latter-day Saints, I don't think, in Ireland, generally.
No, we only have 2 stakes, no temple. And it was really funny whenever I first started putting up videos, Robert Boylan was one of the first people to comment on this like Facebook group. And I was like, who is this guy? You know, he just kept commenting. And then he said how he was from Ireland. I'm like, what the heck? Like, you're from Ireland and you're an apologist? So it's been really cool to meet up. We actually met up in Dublin a month ago and had lunch and went around for the day.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah. And we've done a few interviews as well on my channel as well. Yeah. So yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have pegged your accent as more like Scottish. It's interesting. You are right. It has that thing. The thing, it's not fair though. So you guys over there in the British Isles, your accents make everyone assume an IQ. They give you like 10 or 15 extra IQ points because of your accent.
I mean, it makes you sound smarter.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone like you just sound way smarter when you have a sweet accent from the British Isles. Now, on the other hand, I feel bad for the guys from the South. I actually did a podcast with saints from the South, and unfortunately, the Southern accent, you get like deducted 10 IQ points. You could be brilliant, but the Southern accent just doesn't have the same flair as a nice crisp English accent.
Yeah, no, I love some of the English accents as well. Scottish, you know, you really have to, your ears have to be perked up to really hear what they're saying, you know.
Yeah. Well, getting the nickname the Murph is a good thing because there's actually an American war hero who, I don't know if you've seen the movie Lone Survivor, but
Yes, I
I
have.
think it's
It's such a
Michael
great
Murphy.
movie.
Yeah, Michael Murphy is a Medal of Honor winner in the U.S. and there's actually a workout called the Murph that he
Right,
used to
okay.
do. So anyway, getting that nickname, the Murph, that's quite a good thing.
I had no idea that's why people were calling me that. That's so cool. I love that movie.
I think that's probably has something to do with it. But
Okay.
anyway, give everybody a little bit of a background on you, your relationship to the church, things like that.
Yeah, sweet. So I'm from Northern Ireland. Both my parents were members of the church. I grew up in the church, was baptized at 8, went to young men's seminary. I had a testimony whenever I was 14, felt like I received, a spiritual witness of the Book of Mormon, the prophet Joseph Smith, had other spiritual experiences in my youth. So had a really good upbringing in the church, went on a mission at age 19. I went to Alberta, Canada, and we were talking about this before we hit record. I had an amazing experience on my mission. Like, obviously there was tough times and a lot of rejection, but so many amazing experiences and people I met, and it was really a big booster for my testimony. At age 22, I went through a faith crisis. I had a family member who had left the church due to issues with Joseph Smith and church history, and me being a good return missionary and sincerely wanting to bring her back and to resolve her concerns, I began listening to some of her issues with church history and the church's truth claims. And that sort of sent me down the rabbit hole. Her concerns became my concerns. I started listening to like critical podcasts and reading critical material. And within a very quick space of time, my testimony was just gone. And I stopped believing in the church, in Joseph Smith, in the Book of Mormon, and I went totally inactive. I wouldn't say I was a hostile anti-Mormon. I don't really like that label. But I was pretty against the church. I was sort of like a Jeremy Runnels fanboy for that period whenever I left. I actually went down a bit of a dive into Christianity and nearly became a Christian. But there were certain doctrinal beliefs, and definitely whenever I dived into Calvinism, I couldn't accept a lot of that. So there are experiences in my life that caused me to sort of open up my mind and my heart again to the church, things with apologetics, people sharing experiences with me. And there's one day a friend sent me a talk by Elder Corbridge called Stand Forever. And that was kind of my catalyst, or that was like my James 1:5. That talk, there was nothing that would have intellectually convinced me it was true. But that talk it touched my heart. He talked about secondary questions, primary questions, and he talked about people leaving the church and having issues with the prophet Joseph Smith and church history. And he pretty much at the end of his talk said, like, ask yourselves, ask God, are the scriptures lies, delusion, or truth? And that led me to sort of fast, pray, you really go to God in faith, asking for like a spiritual witness and answer, sort of laying all my concerns, all my doubts, all my issues to one side, because I felt like I was just getting more and more confused the more research I was doing and hearing all these different voices. So long story short, I had a profound spiritual experience and revelation that brought me back to the church and sort of restored my faith again in the church's truth claims. Came back to the church, was trying to resolve my concerns, but was really clinging to my spiritual experiences. I'm married to a woman in the temple, so I'm still in the church. I'm still active. I'm still believing. But even since being back, I've continued to wrestle with doubts, with issues. And over this past year, I've had friends and family members who have gone through a faith crisis and left the church. And that sort of has caused me to like reconfront a lot of those issues that I had. And it has caused me to kind of go down this journey that I really need to confront these things and seek good intellectual answers. And that's sort of what has prompted me to start a YouTube channel where I try to look at church history and sort of like the attacks on the church's truth claims in a way that's balanced. I try to be fair and objective. I try to be kind of neutral and fair, but I'm really trying to look at the strength of the arguments and the evidence and come to some sort of consensus or resolution as best I can, and try to get the spiritual and the intellectual to align. So that's kind of my sort of faith journey and Mormon story in a nutshell. Sorry, that was more than 5 minutes.
No, you're all good. No, and I think that there are a lot of people that are kind of in that sort of a situation. You said that the talk by I think it's Elder Corbridge or Brother Corbridge, that impacted you a lot, and he talked about primary versus secondary questions. By the way, that's one of my favorite talks as well. Tell me a little bit more about what he meant by those primary versus secondary questions.
Yeah, so in the talk, he said that people can be swamped or bombarded or consume all their time and energy focusing on the secondary questions. For example, like Joe Smith's polygamy, or the Book of Abraham translation, or DNA and Native Americans. All sort of like the issues or the things that critics would point to, and using that as a way to figure out if the church is true. And he talked about how we should really, yes, they're important. We can't just dismiss them. We can't just ignore them and leave them to one side. Maybe some people do, but he talked about how the primary questions: is Joe Smith a prophet? Is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints the Lord's restored church? Is Jesus Christ the Son of God, the Savior? Is there a loving Heavenly Father? He talked about like those primary questions are of most significant importance, and if we can find answers to them, then you can try to figure out the rest. But you can never work out if Joe Smith is a prophet just by focusing on the secondary questions. I think that was the point of his talk.
Yeah.
And I sort of, he came across very sincere to me. And it had an impact upon me.
It's funny. I've had people say I have a video series where I talk kind of about level 1 conversations, level 2 conversations, and level 3 conversations, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And people said like, hey, that's like the same thing that Elder Corbridge. I didn't even realize it, but it is. It's at the end of the day, there are those questions that are more fundamental, and that we spend so much time kind of, I think, in the level 3 conversations without really examining the nature of the level 1 conversations. These are the conversations about God, about reality itself, about like questions like, who are you? Like, what are you at heart? And I have found, like I oftentimes tell people, my belief in the Joseph Smith story emerges from my belief in Christianity, and my belief in Christianity emerges from my belief in a higher power, right? It's sort of like these things don't exist independent of one another. They emerge step by step. And I think our bigger problem in today's society is, and I've looked at this historically, like the church back in the UK, I'm actually studying the history of the church right now, and I'm in like the 1860s. And back then, I mean, the missions in the UK and in Europe were just like killing it. Now you go and try and teach in Europe, and it's like really tough.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're over there on that side of the pond. What do you think is the difference between 1860 and 2022 as far as why people are not receptive anymore to our missionaries?
That's a good question. I think one, especially in Ireland, it's quite a religious country, more political and religion. So it can be people's traditions. So they might say, well, I'm Protestant, I'm Catholic. So it's very much rooted in their family tradition. But I think we've just become more secular as a society. I think back in the 19th century, it was the big question was, which is the true church, which is the right church? Whereas now it's like, do we even need church? Like, is there even a God? Do I need to devote my life to religion? So I feel like society has just changed a whole lot. I know over here in the UK, missionaries struggle to get people who are open to listen to their message, and most of the time they're probably people from foreign countries who are the most receptive.
Yep, because those people still have a belief in God. See, that I think my analysis is that Mormonism doesn't really work in it's a level 3 conversation, and you're talking to people who haven't even had the level 1 and 2 conversation anymore in Europe. They've totally forgotten that conversation. They like the conversation that needs to be had in Europe is like the one that Jordan Peterson is having. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
It is this conversation about the nature of reality and ourselves. And what's funny is that Europe is sort of the bed of that conversation. It was where the great minds sort of thought about this. But the thing is that if people are Christians, if they believe fundamentally in the New Testament Jesus, Mormonism can become a very compelling message with the story of an apostasy and a restoration of priesthood. And like, you can use the scriptures to like support that this is a real, this is what Jesus is doing today. But if a person in the 1860s, everybody like was on board Team Jesus, you know what I mean? And now it's like nobody is. And so I think that, again, the primary questions, unless those are addressed, I mean, you can hack at some of the level 3, and even some of those like you're talking about, those are, I call them like a level 4 conversation. It's like conversations within Mormonism itself, right? But the basic framing of that, and that was so helpful for me when I went through sort of my own, what I call sort of a faith remodeling. I never left the church. I never, I always did, but I had to kind of sort through all this stuff. And as I sorted through it, it's like, if I had trouble at level 3, I was able to go back to level 2 and say, hey, maybe back to more primary questions and say, God exists. And I can't find a better, explanation for God than, if God has ever been involved in the world, Jesus Christ, that story, that's the one I'm going to place my faith in. Right.
Yeah.
Like as the best explanation for God. And now granted, there's a lot, you can be very nuanced about that. Well, what does that mean? Like how much of the New Testament, again, those are those secondary questions, but the primary one, is this story fundamentally true in some sense? Now I can, like, there's a lot of relief that I have when I can accept that. Yeah, I've placed my faith there.
And if somebody, talking about different levels of conversation, if somebody doesn't believe in a God, then Joseph Smith's claims of having visions or being delivered gold plates or translating using a seer stone, of course that sounds ridiculous. And unless you would maybe believe in Jesus and in the Bible, then if you believe in that, you might be allowed room. Well, maybe that could happen. It's possible that God could work. If people had visions in the New Testament, God was able to reveal through different means, then he could do it, in our day. But if you don't believe there's a God, and if you don't believe in Jesus and the Bible, then of course you're just going to reject Joseph Smith's claims.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, everything kind of builds on itself. Now, something else I was going to say, so in the church today, you would want to talk to me about some issues where you maybe had, some, you and I have some, you've watched some of my channels. You have some things you agree with me on, maybe some things that you want to push back on a little bit. And I actually, I wanted to open up the conversation a little bit to talk about that. Tell me a little bit about what, your, what's on your mind.
Perfect. I want to start by saying that I really enjoy your channel. I discovered it, I think, around the same time that I started mine. And because there's a lot of critical voices. And I'm somebody I'm very open-minded. I'm very curious, and I want to hear different perspectives. So whenever I first started looking into church history, I was sort of cautioned, oh, don't look at anything that could be critical of the church. And I sort of had the mindset of, well, if it's true, it can withhold scrutiny, it can stand up. And I like to hear both faithful perspectives, critical perspectives, and then I feel like you can make a more balanced, informed sort of conclusion. So yeah, I like your channel. I feel like you come more from I don't know if you consider yourself orthodox. I don't mean that in a simple way, but you're calling like these progmos. You're like advocating for things, which, and I think you've kind of shown that although I would maybe agree more on a political basis with a lot of things they're advocating for, you've demonstrated that it's not in harmony with what the leaders of the church are saying, what prophets have counseled. Don't want to make this about Julie Hanks, but some of the things that she advocates for, like it's your decision whether to wear temple garments, or like the family proclamation and advocating for LGBT and gay marriage, or like is pornography sinful. And I've listened to her interview as well with Bridger, so I think there's a bit of nuance as well. But it's caused me to think, like, what takes precedence, like what trumps what, like personal authority or prophetic authority if there's a conflict. Because for 22 years of my life there never was, until I sort of learned that, oh, prophets, they've maybe been wrong at times about doctrine or revelation, things morally or scientifically. And since coming back, there's been times where I've maybe had this conflict of, I don't know if I agree with that, or maybe they could be wrong here. And it's like, what do you do when there's that conflict? Which sort of submits to what? So yeah, I had I've thought about that quite a lot since your videos. And I thought, yeah, just got some thoughts and ideas that could be interesting for me to share.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a super common conflict. What if you disagree with the brethren? What if you, or how do we reconcile the idea that we're supposed to follow the prophet if the prophet is fallible, right?
Yes.
And there's sort of, it's funny, my brother has his YouTube channel, which is an anti-Mormon channel.
I didn't realize he was your brother. But I noticed that he was always taking videos from you or the Midnight Mormons, but it was Stephen Pinecker that said, oh, I'm interviewing Jacob Hansen, his brother. And I'm like, who's his brother? And he was like, that guy Thor, the skeptic. I'm like, what? I'm like, no way.
So yeah, he kind of made it in response to it. But he's brought up this, he talks about it as the great divide in the church today. Okay.
Yeah.
Sort of those who place who in the hierarchy, right? Which takes precedent, right? Personal authority or the authority of the church. Okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of the way that he frames it. And to be honest, that is a very deep divide in the church, but it's not a new divide. Like, it's not the big conflict in the church today. It's like, you guys, this has been the conflict in not only our church, but in Christianity itself. Like, the Protestant movement was a movement based on, we accept our personal authority over the authority of the church based on our interpretation of the Bible. And the Bible is the ultimate authority. So the thing is about different authorities and which holds the highest ecclesiastical authority within a religious structure. That's like time in memoriam. That's it. Now, I believe that the church has a very particular sort of stance on it, but I think there's some nuances to that. But I'll let you kind of, if you have questions on how I reconcile that or whatever, I'll kind of leave it to you to kind of take on from here and give your thoughts on the nature of the conflict.
Yes. So I'm a very open-minded person, and I like to think of different perspectives. So there'll be times where I'll think, this perspective, then other, where I agree with you and where you make a lot of logical sense. I think the church's position, from my understanding of Elder Renlund's talk at the last General Conference, that there's a framework and there's bounds to revelation. So we can receive personal revelation. We can go to God, receive spiritual answers. And that's something that we're encouraged to do, to seek a testimony for ourselves. And he talked about, you can receive revelation about, what to do for work, or who to marry, or, when to have children, those sorts of things. But, God is a God of order. He's not a God of confusion. And if you receive revelation that isn't in harmony with what God has already revealed, then that's a good sign you've been deceived, which makes sense. Like, if I'm receiving a revelation to do something which is against scripture or against, what God has already revealed, then, people would think there's no way God would tell you that. So it wouldn't make sense if God was telling people contradictory things. So that sort of, I agree when you sort of hold that position, because that makes logical sense. If we're all claiming revelation, but they're all in contradictory, how can that all be from God?
Yeah.
So I get that position. The skeptical part in me, so like, on the other hand, somebody might say, oh, well, that's kind of convenient, that it's only revelation, it's only valid, it's only from God if it coincides with what the church leaders, the leaders of the church are saying, if it coincides with our belief system. And if it doesn't, then just throw it out. So, like, hypothetically, if I were to go to like a Protestant church or another church and say that I received a personal revelation about the Book of Mormon, God has told me it's true, I doubt there'd be many people that would believe that's a revelation. They'd probably say, you were deceived by a false spirit, Joe Smith was a false prophet, because it doesn't fit in with their belief system.
With the authority of the Bible is what they would say.
So they would see it as, they would reject it. And so there's a part of me that thinks that, like, what do we do if somebody receives a revelation and it's maybe not completely in harmony with what the church is saying?
And the church leaders could just be wrong. Like, maybe maybe God's speaking to you about the way things, like, if you were in 1965 and you felt like black should have the priesthood, maybe it is that you were right and that they were wrong. So it's like, the brethren don't always get it right. So that also implies that there's a possibility that you get it right.
Exactly. Like, that makes me think of my friend, you know who Jim Bennett is?
Yeah.
The guy who wrote a response to CS letter. He shared with me, we just did an interview. It's going to be aired in the next couple of weeks. It was a really great interview where we talked about a lot of the issues with the CS letter and his response. But he talked about in 2015 that when the church brought out the policy on the children of LGBT parents couldn't be baptized or confirmed, I think blessed as well, into the church, it created quite the stir. And he felt his own personal authority, how he felt morally, his understanding of what the scriptures say, men will be punished for their own sins, not for the sins of their parents. Jesus doesn't deny children to come unto him. His personal authority told him the church is wrong here. And he sort of said it publicly. He felt like the church was in the wrong. And he felt very close to having to leave the church. But he shared with me he had a divine personal revelation that kept him in. But whenever he spoke publicly, people, they sort of reprimanded him for it. They said, like, just leave the church. Like, you can't be talking against the prophets, seers, and revelators. And I was on my mission whenever the policy came into force. And I actually talked with somebody who had an issue with it. And because I was very orthodox, I was like, well, it came from the prophets. They're the mouthpiece of God. It's, if you have a problem with the policy, that's you, and then we know 3.5 years later, they changed the policy back. Some people might say, well, maybe it was a revelation to change it back. But, Jim Bennett would see it as his personal authority was right. And the prophets, seers, and revelators were wrong.
So an interesting take on that. Well, first of all, personal authority. I don't like the term. And this is why I mean it. Just say personal revelation. That's ultimately what we're talking about. Like, I find it kind of unusual that Julie and other people, that this kind of term, the bottom line is that what we're talking about is that people will say, God told me something different than he told the prophets, right? Yeah. That's the essence of it, right?
She defines it, doesn't she, as personal revelation plus agency.
Yeah, but agency is like, what's the active ingredient in this? If God tells you something, you do it. You know what I mean? Like, if God showed up to me right now and told me, like, hey, you need to go and join the Methodists, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to go join the Methodists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the ultimate authority is God, right?
Yes, I agree.
So in this whole conversation, I think it's important that it gets framed properly. I actually did an entire debate with the Calvinists at Apologia Church on the question of ultimate authority. What is the ultimate authority? And we all know what their answer is. The Bible.
Yeah.
And is the sole infallible rule of faith, right? And I
Yeah.
was arguing against that. But hold on a second. Think about this. The Bible is just the words of the prophets. They're making the same claim as those who would say the prophet of the church today is the ultimate authority on everything, you know, sole infallible man who, now obviously we don't say he's infallible, but functionally people will treat him as though he is, right? So there is this, it's a little bit nuanced here, but essentially it's an appeal to an ecclesiastical priesthood authority as the final word, right? Now, final word on what? Final word on what is true. Okay. Now, I make a distinction here. Okay. I don't believe that the prophets, seers, and revelators of our church are the final arbiters of what is true. Okay. Because they are fallible, they can't be. They can be a reliable source of truth. Okay. But that does not mean that they always get it right. However, I think there is something to be said for ecclesiastical authority so that we don't have the problem of Protestantism, which is that we all make up our own thing. And as soon as you disagree with whatever authority you have, your pastor, you go start your own congregation. And before you know it, you have 50 million churches. There's a reason that the Catholic Church has actually held together for over 2,000 years, spanning empires and politics and wars and all of it. And it is because they have a centralized authority structure.
Yeah.
And so I never want to underplay the need for ecclesiastical authority. Okay.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of Brother Corbett's talk, which is, you've done videos on it, you know, activism towards or against the church. Ultimately, it can undermine, you know, people are criticizing church leaders or advocating against, you know, the church's position on things. It can undermine their credibility to people, which will then weaken their faith in them, you know, in their, you know, authority as prophets, and then can ultimately cause them to leave the church. So it's the whole debate is it right to advocate against them, even if they are in the wrong? And what if you have truth and rights?
So, you know, this is the other thing. People don't realize, they haven't studied church history. They don't know that this has already been something that the church has faced in the past. I'm right now reading 3 different biographies of, well, 2 biographies on Brigham Young and then the Saints Volume 2. And I'm reading them as I go through church history in kind of this big project. And our history is so freaking awesome. Just everybody.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Anyway, in the 1860s, in about 1868 or 9, I can't remember when, there was a movement called the Godbyites. A guy named William Godby, who actually was a British convert, very, very faithful Latter-day Saint, and several other very faithful, active, you know, engaged Latter-day Saint leaders started to kind of have some doubts and some issues with Brigham Young's policies. And frankly, rightfully so.
Rightly so.
There are some things that Brigham was doing that were a little bit, a little wild. Now, granted, I think that there's a complex conversation we had about that, but I'm just going to read a little bit from this book. It's Brigham Young, American Moses. It's the really famous biography on him by Leonard Arrington, which everyone should read, by the way.
I have not read it. I'll need to read it.
He says one of these guys that were with Godby, his name was Harrison. Harrison said he believed in the priesthood control of policy, but not the infallibility of the priesthood. He said, quote, "I do not believe in, according to them, the first presidency, the right to dictate me into the course which I consider wrong, morally wrong." So it's like, that's like, yeah, Jim Bennett right there. You know what I mean? Like here he is, and this guy has a legitimate thing. And I think, what's wrong with that argument? Like, if you think that something is wrong and the church leaders want you to do it, like, do you just go with the church leaders?
Like, find obedience to their authority, you know, not listening to your own moral compass,
personal revelation.
Yeah.
The things that you feel like you're getting from God. Absolutely. I mean, this isn't a new thing, guys.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't the new divide in the church. It's like, this is a very old problem. It's the problem of ecclesiastical authority and infallibility. And that goes for authority within the scriptures, even within the Protestant conversation, as to, are the scriptures infallible? And do we have to, can we recognize that maybe some of the things in the scriptures weren't right? And when you open up this window of infallibility, it creates all this problem, because now you don't have an infallible source of truth.
And people who grew up with black and white thinking, like I did, so I would have thought everything a prophet would speak, as a prophet, like at general conference, or is the mind and the will of God. There couldn't be anything wrong with it. Everything in scripture is 100% the word of God, kind of God breathed, like Protestants.
Yep.
I
call them Mormon Calvinists.
Yeah, that I don't think I'm unique. That was sort of the Mormonism that I grew up with. And then whenever I learned, for the first time that, Brigham Young taught false doctrine, or there's maybe things in the scriptures that, are contradictory, and that was really hard for me to reconcile, because when you have black and white thinking, you think, well, if there's 1% or 2% that's wrong, then it's not all true, and you just throw it out.
Yep. And here's the thing, is that I began to realize something as I had my conversations with the Calvinists. They have an absolute obsession with the need for an infallible source of truth.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't exist. We don't believe in infallible sources of truth. Even our own Book of Mormon says, look, if there are mistakes, these are the mistakes of men, right? We look for reliable sources of truth, but not infallible sources of truth. But the thing is that it creates conflict, because if there's any infallibility in there, then there's a lot of question. Well, is this one of those infallible? Is this one of those fallibilities manifesting himself? And Harrison, in this, and I'll continue to read here, he says, and his big point, his issue was, he says, it is in accepting the infallibility of the guidance of the church without any exceptions. That was his big problem that he had, him and God and them, right? And it was really interesting to see how Brigham and the other church leaders responded, because they didn't respond with, well, we're infallible. You just need to shut up and listen, because the truth comes through us. In fact, Brigham very explicitly tells them, I'm not infallible. I'm a fallible man. But he said, the priesthood that I hold is infallible. Now, I want to pause for a minute with what he's saying there. Okay. The priesthood, as I understand it, is an order. It's a structure within we operate. And what he was pointing out, he did the exact same thing that Elder Corbett talked about. It was really interesting to see they gave the same answer. They said, look, at some point, you undermine by pointing to the fallibility constantly, you undermine the structure that exists. And in the long game, in the long run, think about the Catholics. The structure is what holds us together.
Yeah.
It's actually funny. I would say the last day of my mission, I wrote down in my journal what I learned from my mission. I wanted to kind of like sum it up. And it was weird. The lesson that I learned on my mission was not the lesson I expected to learn. I expected some like deep thing about loving the people, and I did, and I had all that. But I came to understand early in my mission, everyone knows mission rules can be a little bit oppressive sometimes. And I was in Argentina. In Argentina, soccer is a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
And after my first transfer, a missionary had broke his leg playing soccer, and they banned us from playing soccer. I didn't play soccer the 2 years that I was in Argentina. Okay. And that was like, I was looking forward to getting good at soccer and all this stuff. And like, and it was a rule that I didn't like. And there were other rules I didn't like. And I remember the first half of my mission, I spent a lot of time kind of, I was never a disobedient bad missionary, but it always was like a thorn in my side. And I don't know what happened. I had a lot of experience I can't go into, but something happened where I said, Jacob, it doesn't matter. It's not your call to make. Can you accept that even if this is the wrong call, that it's not yours to make? In other words, can I sustain the hierarchical structure still, even though you don't think they're doing it all right? Because the structure itself matters. And we, as sort of modern liberal, meaning like classical liberally minded people, are very, those are from Protestant roots, by the way, historically speaking. We come from that, no, like stick it to the authority, power to the people.
Yeah, whistleblowers.
Exactly.
Call them out. Yeah, hold them accountable.
But if you think about it, if you think about it, that Elder Corbett or Brother Corbett talked about that there are channels for this. It is not that the church, you can't have concerns, you can't voice those concerns. It's the way you go about doing it. If you contact your priesthood leaders, if you have those kind of conversations, if you do that, like there are ways to do it, but it's not to, but at some point, and I don't know exactly where this line is, right? This is maybe where the hard part of it is to figure out, well, where is that line between, counseling together about things that you don't think are right and tearing down faith in the authority structure of the church itself and actually harming the mission of the church, right?
Yeah.
And Brigham, it's interesting what he said. He said, and now Brigham said, what would happen if every person goes his or her own way? He was talking to this about these people. He said, what confusion, what discord, what disconnect, what hatred would soon creep into the bosom of individuals, one against another. And I was thinking, man, that's like exactly what we have today. We have immense divisions because we all we break away from the unifying structure of priesthood authority, and you end up with, I point to Protestantism. That's what happened. They rejected the authority structure that held them together as a church and people. And you, being in Ireland, know very well that can make horrible messes within the ecclesiastical structure of the church. And Brigham said, are we the church and kingdom of God, the family of heaven? Yes. Have we been made, or we have made no bargain? Yes, we have made no bargain to gather up Zion. I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong. We have made no bargain to gather up to Zion to raise confusion. In other words, we're not bringing people together to raise confusion. There's my whole thing with the whole, okay, well, the prophet's infallible, do you sustain him? You don't have to agree with the prophet. There even are channels for you to talk about your concerns with your own leaders, and maybe they won't do anything, and fine. That's their prerogative. You don't then go, well, if you guys aren't going to do what I want, I'm going to seek to go around you to agitate and engage in activism against the church to try and create the change that I want. That, in my mind, is where you cross over that line into apostasy, because at that point, you're actually challenging the very structure itself as oppressive and as wrong. And when you do that, you're challenging the church. The church is the structure.
Yeah. And I think the big question is, because I listened to Elder Corbett's talk and critics were just outraged with what he said. Like that, they were just like, can't believe he's saying all these things, pretty much saying don't criticize church leaders, don't advocate against them. But the big question is this the Lord's church and his kingdom? Are they his servants or not? If they're not, then I 100% agree with criticizing, advocating against everything the critics should do. Like if they're not what they claim to be, then all those critics, I think, are in the right and they're speaking out against. If they are the Lord's servants, if this is the Lord's kingdom, his church, and I've thought about this question because if I believe in that truth claim, but then I feel that they're doing something which I don't agree with morally or politically, like something that I struggle with is, for example, the word of wisdom, more in a intellectual way. Mm-hmm. I don't struggle with the temptation. I did drink tea, coffee, and alcohol whenever I went inactive, but it's never been a struggle for me. So whenever I grew up in the church, I always saw it as it's a commandment. You just follow it. It's from God. Whenever I looked into church history, and really when I just carefully read D&C 89, I realized that, it wasn't a strict commandment when it was first revealed. It was
Brigham Young chewed tobacco.
Or it actually says not by way of strict commandment. So it was like instruction, counsel, and Jesus drank wine, Joseph Smith drank beer and wine, and it wasn't
Brigham Young did.
Yeah, and my personal authority, because whenever I went inactive, I drank some of those things, and I've done other things which I felt guilty for, but I personally did not feel whenever I drank some of those things that I've sinned or I've lost the spirit. And I would have been told in youth, if you partake of those substances, even if you take one sip of coffee, the spirit will go away because you're breaking a commandment. Now that I'm back in the church and I see that the word of wisdom the revelation originally wasn't a strict commandment. It was counsel. And then in the 1920s, it was then made a test of fellowship to go to the temple under Heber J. Grant. My personal authority, my experience with drinking those things, my view of the history and reading the revelation, I have a hard time intellectually that it's a commandment and a test of fellowship to enter the temple. I don't advocate this publicly. This is just in my head, but I personally feel that it shouldn't be a test of fellowship to enter the temple if somebody drinks the odd cup of tea or the odd cup of coffee. Now, if I said that in a church meeting, they'd probably be like, "Oh, you secretly just want to do that." And like, maybe I would occasionally, but it's more the principle. It's like, so I have this sort of conflict because that's my personal authority. But if I choose to follow that, then it undermines what the church leaders and sort of like the commandment, and it would jeopardize me then entering the temple. So I have this conflict, and it's like, what do I decide to do? And ultimately, if I want to sort of be in good fellowship with the church and attend the temple, I need to submit my personal authority and follow it, even though part of me feels like, I don't think it's doctrinal. I think it's a policy, and I think it could be adjusted or taken away. But it comes back to, well, maybe the change was inspired, and if they're prophets, then who are you to say that they're wrong?
Yeah. No, and I would say very much like with the example I gave with the soccer stuff. At some point I say, look, this isn't my church. It's a hierarchical structure here. It's the Lord's church. And if I study the New Testament in Jesus Christ, going back again, like we were kind of talking about earlier, to the deeper foundations here, Jesus Christ very clearly set up a structure. And so I will honor that structure until I think the structure is fully, corrupt and no longer like doing his will. And maybe people are getting to that point. I personally, think I have a fairly large amount of leeway as far as allowing the brethren to be imperfect. Here's where I oftentimes go with this sort of, people say, well, the brethren are fallible, or they're fallible individuals. And I go, yes, so are you. And the thing is, you have a stewardship. Like, I have a stewardship that in my mind is just as important to God as the president of the church. I'm a husband and I'm a father. Okay. The Lord is just as willing to guide me in my stewardship as he is the prophet of the church. I believe that wholeheartedly. I don't think there's any difference. Do I make mistakes in my stewardship? Yes. Do I get things wrong? Yes. So I personally look at the president of the church the same way. I say, look, you guys are ultimately doing the best that you can to follow the Lord's guidance. And frankly, I think you guys do an excellent job, right? I believe they do a phenomenal job. And I do believe that they're inspired. But the thing is that just like me, if I make mistakes, does that mean I'm no longer a father and a husband? Does that mean that the structure goes away? No. My mission president, it was his call to make the decision. I, to this day, think it was the wrong call to make. But I also recognize that why am I fighting against that thing? There are much better things for me to dedicate my time and effort to than to advocating against this policy, which is his to make. Now, if I were in an
Taking your
interview,
eye off the mark, so to speak.
yeah, and the thing is okay, but even if I did want to, if I was in an interview with him, and I didn't do this in the mission, but this I think would have been appropriate. I could have talked with him and expressed my concern. I could have said, why I think that it was worth it, and we could have had a conversation about it, and maybe he would have said no. But the moment that I go outside of the appropriate channels and I begin to undermine him, do you see how that transitions from, okay, I have a disagreement, which is fine, to now I'm actually doing something to undermine the structure and the authority he has to make that call? It's his call to make, not mine, right? And within the church, there are things that are like that. And we have to recognize that, that again, because the danger is if you oust them from their position of authority, if it's not their call to make, it's our call to make, everything changes.
Yeah.
You're no longer the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that's why the brethren protect the institution of the church. And the people who don't think the institution matters don't understand history. And they don't understand what Joseph Smith restored. And you literally are just saying, well, the church doesn't matter. Because what the church fundamentally is a structure.
Yeah. No, I think the church would crumble if their authority was to be undermined, and if people stop believing that they are,
what is the church except for the authority? Like okay, there's a lot of other groups out there who believe in Jesus. There are even groups who believe in the Book of Mormon. There's all sorts of groups. What is it? What is the essential characteristic of the church?
Yeah.
It's the keys of the kingdom that were given to the apostles. That's it. That is what fundamentally, that is what the church is. Without those
churches.
Yeah. Without, like, let's say that the brethren did not hold the keys of the kingdom. Then what are they? What are we?
Yeah.
What the heck are we doing?
I think that's the big question, because some people might feel, I don't want to go to fallibility because that's not the focus, but some people would feel that, if they've been wrong about doctrine, if they've been wrong about a revelation or a policy, it will call into question, how do we know when they're right? I would have grown up hearing things like, the prophet will never lead you astray. The prophet will always teach you the truth. So it wasn't part of my worldview or my view of a prophet for 22 years of my life that he could be wrong. Obviously, we know that, they've made doctrinal mistakes and they're fallible, and that was probably a naive, simplistic view of prophets. I think that's common, though. I think it's very common.
There's a funny little joke I heard once, and it's not totally accurate about Catholics, but they can forgive me just for the sake of this joke. The Catholics believe the Catholic Church says that the Pope is infallible, but none of the Catholics believe it. And then you flip it around and you say, Mormons say that their prophet is fallible, but none of the Mormons believe it.
yeah, I've heard that joke. I think obviously I would have grown up believing, prophets aren't perfect, they're fallible. So like, I remember when President Nelson visited my mission, he got a scripture wrong, he quoted it wrong, and I remember thinking at the time, like, he got that wrong. But I was like, I suppose he's human. But I think they can be doctrinally inerrant. Like, they're not doctrinally inerrant. Like, they can make mistakes about doctrine or revelation. And a skeptic might say, that might call into question, are they real prophets? Then does that call into question their credibility? And
absolutely,
yeah,
and it does.
And that's, I think, a personal decision people have to make in sort of figuring out, whether they believe them or not. A hypothetical actually, this isn't hypothetical, this is actually real. I want to get your thoughts on it. There was a sister from my mission who put up a public post. I can't remember if it was before my faith crisis or after. I can't remember. Might have been before, about coming out LGBT. So she put out a really long post saying how she knows, Heavenly Father is real. She knows the Book of Mormon is true. Joe Smith is a prophet. Really seemed really sincere with bearing her testimony of all these spiritual things. She said that she's fasted, she's prayed, she's counseled, she's went to the scriptures, she's sought personal revelation on this matter, and she said that she received a personal revelation that Heavenly Father told her that he loved her, he created her this way, and that he wants her to have a loving relationship with a woman. Now, whenever I read that post, my orthodox response was, God wouldn't tell you that, because that's not in harmony with what the family proclamation and church doctrine. That's obviously your own revelation. The other part of me, who's more open-minded, reflecting back, would say, well, who am I to say that definitely wasn't a revelation or not? Like I shared with you in the beginning, I had my own personal revelation that brought me back to the church. Obviously, it was personal, it's subjective. And, I believe that was really what brought me back. It was that personal revelation, personal authority. It wasn't what the prophets were saying. Like in my mind, at age 23, they had no credibility because I lost faith in them, but it was the personal revelation that caused me to believe again. But I have, I think, more epistemic humility and uncertainty. There's a part of me that says, I could be wrong. I don't know for 100%, but I'm going with this experience. I'm exercising faith, trusting that God gave me that answer. But then part of me feels, who am I to say your spiritual revelation isn't valid? It's wrong because it doesn't fit in with my belief system. And it's like putting God in a box, so to speak. Like, God cannot do this. And again, I know that there's problems because if we're all claiming revelation that's contradictory, then it's just complete confusion. Mm-hmm. But then it caused me to open mind, like, who am I to say, no, that's not a revelation?
So as I explore is what you're talking about here, again, I think half of these problems have to do with the way that we frame them, okay? What you're discussing is epistemology. You're talking about, how do I know X or Y, right? And you talk about having epistemic humility, which is a good thing. The problem is that those who seek for an infallible source of truth, they are seeking for something that they can say that they know, right? Yeah. Because in their mind, to say that you know something, you basically have to have some infallible source that has proven it, meaning 100% rational certainty that this is the way that it is.
Yes.
This isn't the way that it works, okay? Because at the end of the day, here's what's interesting in this whole conversation. The thing that everyone, the exmo, the radical, whatever, the progmo, the orthodox, whatever it is, we're all going to agree on one thing. The truth is what ultimately decides.
Yes.
If it's true, that's what you go with.
Yeah.
Okay. So
exactly.
The question is, and this may be at the heart of all of this, is how do we know what's true or not? And, is it personal revelation? Is it what the prophets have said? Is it science? Is it reason? Is it the fruits of the Spirit? And I personally, and the Midnight Mormons kind of coined it as the Hanson Five. And what it is, so this, but the thing is that, so what this is it's 5 different tools that we have. None of them are infallible. None of them. Okay. There are things like intuition, empirical experience, like empirical evidence, reason, outcomes or the fruits of something, and then what I call authority, right? Authority meaning someone else has said it. Therefore, you give a certain level of credence to it. So I want to take this model and remember, I use them like 5 witnesses, right?
Yeah.
If I was the judge sitting there and I had one witness come in and tell me something, maybe it happened. If another witness comes in and tells the exact same story, I'm more confident. By the time the fifth witness shows up and he's saying the same thing, I'm going, okay, this is, more witnesses, more confidence that it happened. Okay. Confidence, never 100% rational certainty.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, my point is authority, meaning whether that's written down words in the Bible, that's just the words of the prophets written down a long time ago, or the word of the living prophet, or the authority of a group of the greatest brain surgeons on earth. Again, they're fallible, but they're a reliable, we believe that they are a reliable source of truth relating to their subject matter. Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to how do I know if this person received a personal revelation, I'm asking a question that I have to use this model to figure out. And you're right. Who am I to say? Maybe I'm wrong. I can't ever be 100% confident, but I can be very confident when the words of the dead prophets and living prophets, all of those authorities on morality, say that that's not correct. When reason, as I study the scriptures and try and, look at contradictions and logic and things like that, are against it. When, even if my intuition maybe makes me feel like, well, but I feel really, I feel like it isn't wrong for that person to do it. You can see how there's multiple sort of sources here. And you're right. If they contradict, if you have four witnesses that say one thing, but one of them that says another, it's like, well, maybe I'm less confident. But I can still say that the majority of the evidence seems to fall, according to that sort of epistemological framework, on my side. And so whatever it is, that's the other thing is this whole thing, the whole thing of fallibility and prophets, it's literally dealing with one element of the five. And the thing is that they are fallible, but they are reliable. That is my conclusion. They're very reliable when it comes to matters of life and salvation, right? When it comes to the thing that the church is fundamentally about, our nature as human beings, our spiritual well-being, they are a deeply reliable source. And I know that, or I have confidence of that, because of the fruits that I have experienced as I have lived it, and through looking at the history of what emerges from people who follow the counsel of the prophets. And we'll nitpick the little, things they get wrong. But when you look at the entire prophetic message and what it is, that's one of the reasons I love like what Jordan Peterson is doing, is because he's kind of pointing out the big picture here. He's like, there's an enormous wisdom that built our world in the scriptural stories and in the revelations of the prophets. And that to me is where I go, you know what? I'm a believer that there are authorities on matters of spirituality because I'm a Christian, because Jesus taught that. And I truly believe that these 12 people or 15 are authoritative and they're worth listening to, even if they're fallible. And I believe that I have to uphold the structure that grants them the credibility that I believe they merit. But if you don't believe that, and that's kind of where I do look at some of these people and I say, look, if you fundamentally don't believe that these guys are reliable sources of truth, then, and you want to agitate against them, it's like there's a lot of Protestant churches out there that's like their whole thing is like reject authority, like just go with your personal relationship with God. And it's like, all right. But then you have all the problems that come with Protestantism.
Yeah. So I guess I appreciate, I think that's very fair. My final thoughts on personal authority or personal revelation. I don't feel like we're really at odds with each other that much. But if I had to choose, which trumps which, for me, I think I'm going to explain why. For me, kind of personal revelation, I'm going to tell you why I lean that way. I feel like the core message of Joseph Smith's first vision is ask of God. God is the source of all truth. He was confused. He was, going to different churches, listening to different ministers. He was going to the Bible, and he didn't know who was right, by what they were saying. And, they were claiming they're right, they're claiming they're right. And he went to God seeking personal revelation. God is the source of all truth. He's the ultimate authority. And I've heard people in the church say, like, you shouldn't pray about whether to go on a mission because the answer is already predetermined. God's already revealed his will. And I have some issues with that, just because, like, we're invited to pray and ask about if the Book of Mormon is true with faith. Like, what's the point in my mind, seeking a spiritual testimony if the answer is already predetermined? If it's already predetermined, this is the only answer you can get, is there much point praying about it? And for me, going back to my personal experience at age 23, whenever I was out of the church, that was a real intent prayer where, like, if God had have told me, no, it's all a cult, you made the right decision, I would have never came back. I would have been an anti-Mormon you would have hated on the internet. Like, if he had told me that, I would have followed that. And, like, it didn't matter to me if President Nelson testified he's a prophet till he's blue in the face. Like, it was my personal authority or revelation that preceded it. It's like they didn't have, in my view, prophetic authority unless I received a personal revelation to give me that. I think that.
And here's what's funny. I agree with you. I was so here's when I was having that debate with the Calvinists, it's funny because people are like, wait a minute, they get almost like confused because it's like I'm arguing almost your position, but there's a reconciliation here. Okay.
Yeah.
I asked my Calvinist friends in that debate, I asked them, what if God appeared to you right now in this room and told you that your interpretation of the Bible was wrong? And they didn't say this, but they basically would be forced to say that wasn't God. Because that couldn't have been God, because God would not contradict his word.
Yes.
And you start to see, wait a minute, their God isn't God. Their God is the Bible, and not only the Bible, but their particular interpretation of the Bible.
Yes. Yeah.
And it isn't that the Bible's infallible, it's that they believe their interpretation of the Bible is infallible, which we should be able to see problems with. Of course, if God comes into this room and says, Jacob, go join the Methodists, like that personal revelation, that trumps everything. Of course it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I believe that. But I always have to remember that I am fallible as well. And I have to be, there's a point to where I question, is this God speaking to me or is it not? And if God does genuinely, a person feels that God has told them, I may disagree with them. And I may present my reasons for disagreeing with them when they go and join, the Catholic Church or whatever. But ultimately, if God told them that, well, then I'm in the wrong and they're right. So the thing is we just come down to a simple disagreement. You believe that God told you X. I disagree. And then we have to discuss, well, what are the reasons why you think that? If I have the scriptures, the words of the living prophets, reason, empirical evidence, the fruits, and my own intuition on my side, and the only thing you have on your side is that you just got a feeling, I'm not convinced. I'm going to stay on my side of the fence saying I'm right. So when a person claims personal revelation that seems to contradict all the other witnesses that I have, it's not enough for me. And so I'm going to disagree with that person. One of the things that bugs me is people will say, well, I had a personal revelation and that's like the trump card. It's like, no, it's not the trump card because I have to believe you. I don't just because you said you had a revelation from God doesn't mean that you had a revelation from God. So let's look at the other things that would validate that was an actual revelation from God. And that, for me, is that's where the conversation breaks down, because when you look at those other things, they don't have a case, but they're just like, but I feel like God told me. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I feel that you're mistaken. And people get upset about that. It's like, no, but you can't deny my personal lived experience. It's like, yes, I can. Because
and that's logical as well, because if they're claiming they received a revelation, do something like crazy, like rob a bank or murder someone, like you'd have to be like, no, although Elder Renan, talks about the exception with Nephi, like in general, like,
well,
no.
and I don't fault, like, if someone comes and tells you that God told them to, do something that seems out of line with what God would say, I'm not saying it's not possible that there wasn't some kind of an exception that was made in those cases. I'm not saying that, but I don't, from that framework, I still have to say I'm calling it into question, right? I'm not convinced. It's on them to convince me that their revelation was genuine. And what I find is that they don't present anything except for that just they claim it. It's just a naked claim. And so I'm sorry, if you claim that God told you that you don't need to wear your garments anymore, or that you can, do whatever you want, like the word wisdom thing that you brought up. Okay.
By the way, I'm not claiming that was a spiritual thing. That's more my mind.
Well, fine.
I've not received a revelation.
But see, but at least even if you said that you did receive a revelation with that, and then I said, okay, and then you made that case as to why you think that you're right, well, then that's much more compelling. I may disagree with it, and I may present my own point of view, but that's the whole thing about the witnesses. There's that scripture, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. There's a principle in it. The more witnesses to something, the more sure we are that it's true. And so
I agree.
So there's 2 heresies that are out there, and I think that they both need to be rejected. One is what I call the heresy of authority alone. For the Protestants, this is scripture alone, right? It's the authority of the dead prophets. In Mormonism, you have the authority of the living prophets heresy, where that's the ultimate trump card. If they say it, it's true. The other one is what I call a feelings alone. So you have scripture alone.
Yeah.
You have feelings alone, right? Epistemology. Well, I felt it, therefore it's true. And I'm like, nope, wrong. I think that what we're taught as Latter-day Saints is that the truth ultimately is what is the trump card, right? What is true? We seek it from wherever we can find it. And what happens as you do that is you end up finding there are multiple sources that bring truth into alignment. And as those things align, we become more confident in our worldview and what we believe. And that's why I think for you, talking about your personal story, you have that conflict between what you've intuitively experienced and known through the fruits of the Spirit and through the experiences that you've had through your own intuitions, and maybe some of your rational faculties.
Yes.
Reason being another witness. The reason witness is a little shaky, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
And so we want to bring these things into alignment. And when we do, we feel confident and happy, and we don't have the cognitive dissonance. And I believe that ultimately with personal authority is what's going on. And there is no trump card.
Yeah.
Well,
I actually think I would agree with you there. I think, and me coming on, I didn't want to come on to really be like, this is where I disagree with you. I just wanted to share sort of my thoughts and my perspectives and things going around. And maybe there doesn't necessarily have to be a trump card. Maybe it isn't which takes precedence. It could be take them all into consideration.
And that to me has really granted me a great deal of peace, because I believe that we walk by faith in life. Okay.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
And what does that mean? To me, it means faith is where you place your chips, and it's manifested in your behavior. Your behavior manifests where you place your faith. And because everyone has to behave in the world and do things in the world, everyone places their faith somewhere.
That's right.
And so when I think about that, I go, where should I place my faith? What should govern my behavior? What worldview is it that undergirds my belief system? And I'm sorry, it's getting, we've gone I don't know how long you were planning on doing this, but if you have another 15 minutes, I would like to actually show you something.
Yeah.
So we don't have, the witnesses don't give you perfect rational certainty. They give you a level of confidence that something is true and real. Okay.
Yeah.
And then based on that, we place our faith, we place our chips on something being true, and we act as though it is real and true. And everybody does that. The question is, where are you placing your faith?
Yeah.
And why? And what I want to share, let me actually see if I can pull this up real quick. I believe one of the greatest scriptures in the world, in my opinion, that was a big help to me as I kind of was navigating my faith, was Jesus goes up and he tells people about the sacrament. And he says, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And people are kind of like, whoa, dude, that's weird. Like, and it says a bunch of people left. And Jesus looked to his disciple and he said, will you leave too? And Peter had his famous answer. He said, where will we go? What he's asking is where are we going to place our faith if not in you? Like, I have to place my faith somewhere. So I created this little flow chart, and I've been wanting to talk with someone about it.
Guinea pig.
So, because I believe that there are only so many options available as to where you can place your worldview. So here we have, I'm going to bring this thing full screen. And as we look at this, you have kind of the first level of conversation, right? You start to examine your life. And I believe the first question we really ask is, who are we, right? And the first thing, there's just a binary. There either is some sort of a higher power, something you might call God, or there's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's say that you place your faith that God exists. Well, now you're in the world of theism, really, normally. You could also be a pantheist, but I believe pantheism and deism, if I kind of laugh about this. So if a person does not believe in God, or a person believes in God and they say, well, God is everything. It's the universe. It's, that pantheism where God is everything.
Yeah.
The problem is if God is everything, then God is nothing. Because if you're in order to be something particular, you have to be distinct from everything else.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Because that was sort of the Christian view of the Trinity, which I find hard to comprehend. Like, God is everywhere, omniscient, omnipresent, and it's the more I dived into it, I found it hard to really understand that. Like, so how do you separate the Holy Spirit from the Father if they're both omniscient, omnipresent?
Yeah. Pantheism is inherently logically broken because it's just atheism with more steps. Because at the end of the day, if God is nothing in particular, then he does not exist. To exist, you must be something in particular. You're just calling everything God. But it's like, what are you talking about? And then you also have deism, right? So deism is where God set the world into motion. There was some sort of a higher power, but it doesn't interact with us in any way. And there's this brilliant quote by Elder Christofferson where he says, a God who does not demand anything of you is the functional equivalent of a God who does not exist. It's
I remember that quote.
If God no way it interacts with us, if there's no like connection between us and him, and like what, then you go back to no God. So theism is the only option for someone who actually believes in God, like that God actually exists. Because the other options, pantheism and deism, they lead you to atheism. They're just atheism with more steps, right? And
I also had the thought right before my personal epiphany experience. I also thought, if I don't believe in a God who can speak to me, I also thought there's no point believing in that God or worshiping that. If I don't believe that this God will interact or communicate with me, he might as well not be there as well. That's how I felt. So whenever I was being discouraged, well, don't pray and ask about these things. Some Christians was that that's how you could be deceived. I was like, no, like that. Is God that weak? You know, that
Yes,
he's unable to answer my prayer?
absolutely. And so these lead you back to atheism, just with more steps.
Yeah.
I always say pantheism and deism just are atheism with more steps. Now, when there is no God, right? This means that the universe is purposeless. It's just a cosmic accident, and it's filled with suffering and malevolence. And in my mind, in all honesty, I don't go through the secular humanism route to get to nihilism, which I'll talk about here in a second. I go straight to nihilism because the world there's one thing that I think we should all just recognize. One of the great truths of Christianity is that we live in a fallen world. And I'm sorry, if your life is pretty good, great, congratulations. That only magnifies how unfair it is. Because you know how many creatures in existence have suffered and then died? And if it's all for nothing, like, what are you talking about? I would much rather say this never should have existed. It's like a cruel joke. Like, why? With all the suffering and pain and misery, and you're like, well, my life's pretty good. It's like, yeah, go tell that to all the other people that had horrible, meaningless lives, that suffered with some delusion the whole time that there was some God that was going to take care of them in the next life, and then they died. And it was all just madness. And in my mind, it's like, what? For nothing. And nihilism, I think, is a very powerful argument. But then people say, well, we can create our own values, and that goes to secular humanism. And again, we could talk. I love to crap all over secular humanism because I find it to be an absolute joke. It's just Christianity without everything that makes Christianity what it is. It says humans have inherent value. It's like, really? And by the way, anyone watching this, if you want to debate me on secular humanism and why it actually is meaningless nonsense, I'd love to do that. But needless to say, that's where it takes me, right? It always leads. I do not find secular humanism sustainable. And so anything without God leads to nihilism, I think, logically. I think secular humanism is just a gut response that people have because they can't handle nihilism. And I don't blame them. It's more like it's the opium of the masses, in my opinion, as Marx would say.
Yeah.
So that leads us to the only real viable option here. Now, granted, you can say I believe that there is a real there's a real case to say that nihilism is the answer. There is no God. There is no purpose. This is all a big cosmic accident. I don't believe that, and I have lots of reasons why. And because of that, I believe that there is some sort of a higher power.
For me, I find that a somewhat depressing worldview. It's one that I've thought about, and to me, I find it very empty and depressing.
And the question is this: why would you place your faith in that? This is Pascal's wager. Pascal is saying, look, we got to place our faith somewhere. So why would you place it in, it's all meaningless, purposeless, nothing? You don't gain anything out of that. And the thing is, you could be wrong. There's a chance that there's something bigger to the universe. I believe that's why most people on earth are believers.
Yeah.
It's because I think somewhere deep down they know that this doesn't make any sense to place my faith in nothing, because I can't live that way. I don't live that way. I functionally act as though things matter.
Yeah.
And not only that they matter now, but that they matter in some sort of a bigger picture, right? And so anyway, I think the path to that is that there is some sort of a higher power that interacts with the universe. There is a God. But then we go to, okay, well, what is the nature of God? Now we've just jumped into the level 2 conversation, theology. We're trying to understand the nature of this higher power. Okay? So there are only so many major sort of seriously thought out movements in human history about the nature of God and this higher power. You have Islam, you have Christianity, you have Judaism, you have paganism, which I would put Hinduism into that same camp, kind of a polytheistic sort of worldview, or what I call vague spiritualism. That's like all of the manifestations of like, well, God's like, kind of woo-woo in the universe, and it's very vague, and it's self-contradictory, and there's all sorts of
Would
problems.
Buddhism fall under that category? Kind of like spiritualism as well?
What was that?
Would Buddhism, would it fall under that category?
Yeah, probably Buddhism would fall under a type of spiritualism.
Yeah.
Because Buddhism doesn't have a lot to say about things like creation.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's kind of a problem. like it's
There's
not a
much
very
theology, I don't think, in Buddhism.
It's a very shallow theology. Paganism, very shallow theology. I would say Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three great monotheistic movements, I can disagree with them, but they're sophisticated.
Yes. Yeah.
They're highly intellectually interesting in the world of, okay, if there's a higher power, what is the nature of that higher power? Right. And then I settled on Christianity, and now comes the level 3 conversation, Christian theology. What is the nature of Jesus Christ? What is the nature of this, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as manifest through him? And do you see how now I'm getting somewhere where I can, like, where am I placing my faith? Am I placing it in spiritualism? Am I placing it in pantheism, which is just take me to nihilism? Am I placing it in Islam? Right? Like, you're going to go somewhere down that path. Everyone you know is going down that path, and their actions will manifest where they are. And most people actually are not nihilists because they don't act like it.
Yeah.
They actually subconsciously still retain in their spirit and in their soul some sort of a light that tells them that life is bigger than that. And some people say, the nihilists say, well, that's just, their biology, working itself out. Fine. But is that where I'm going to place my faith? Does that make any sense? What if is there a chance that there's something more to life? Fine, go to spiritualism. Don't define God. Make it really vague and unknown, whatever. A lot of people go there.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of people that leave the church either go agnostic or probably that vague spiritualism. There's a God, but he could be everywhere, just the universe.
Yep. I would say right now, that's probably the fastest growing religion in the world. I don't think that the people of Europe, and you'd know this better than me, and increasingly the United States is going that way, that they're all becoming hard atheists. Mm-hmm. Hard atheists generally end up as secular humanists. That's where Dawkins and all those guys are. They're all secular humanists. Because they just reject any sort of a higher power. But the point, my point with this whole thing is, where will you go?
Yeah. And there kind of is not much middle ground in some ways. I think that could be a conversation either for another time if we don't have time to talk about it here. But the question is there middle ground? Can you be neutral in the church? And the church is sort of set up itself that it's either true or it's not. It's either like the kingdom of God or it's nothing. And yes, there's gray and there's nuance, but like either Joseph Smith had a first vision or he didn't. Either the Book of Mormon is true or...
And you could go back to being some sort of a mere Christian where you believe in Christianity that maybe fall more under a Protestant type movement, but there's no like true church, right? And so within that level 3 conversation, yes, either the restored church is true or you got to go back in the map. You've got to go back into your Christianity and figure it out. But some people go back into their Christianity, they can't maintain it. And then they go back into their theism and they say, you know what? I'm just going to nihilism and into atheism, right? Mm-hmm. The thing is that there isn't a lot of middle ground. Everyone falls into one of these categories because you can't be in 2 categories at once. You can't be both a pantheist and a Latter-day Saint. You're just confused.
Yeah. And even when you look at, Jesus's words, they don't allow for much middle ground. It's like either you're for me or you're against me. You're either my disciple or you're not. And the scriptures say you can't really be lukewarm. You can't kind of be 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And that's something that I think I've been a little bit guilty of since coming back and having maybe some nuanced or more progressive view. You can, when you view that maybe the prophets have been wrong in this instance, or maybe scripture's not 100% the word of God, it can lead people. I think it can cause people to pick and choose a little bit, and then that can become cafeteria Mormonism in some ways, and then they can justify not following everything, or I'm going to follow these things. This sits right with me. This resonates with me. But these parts, I don't think that's inspired. I don't think that's God. And that can lead to another problem as well.
And we all, to some extent, don't have perfect, we all have teachings that we have issues with, or things that we might think that are out of the ordinary. That's fine. The question I have is, where have you placed your faith?
Yeah.
Where, like, you don't have to have everything figured out. The question is at the end of the day, fundamentally, which one of these have you placed your faith on? Yeah. And the reality is that you're like, I would love for someone to come and explain where they place their faith that doesn't somehow map onto this map. I made this map with that in mind. Like, where is it? Right now, maybe there's some version of pantheism that I don't have on here or something, but the basic idea is that this is kind of what you're left with. And frankly, you have no idea how many times I've had to go back to, okay, well, if not this, then what?
Yeah.
And I've asked the exact same question. I said the same thing that Peter said to Jesus. Well, where am I going to go? Like, to secular humanism? Like, I've looked at secular humanism. And this is the thing. I don't say this because like, oh, I just want to like stay in the church. No, it's because I've actually looked at the other options. I've looked at them in detail. And I can tell you, it's like, there's this funny joke. They say democracy is a terrible form of government, except for when compared to every other form.
Yeah.
I oftentimes with stuff like, man, we got a lot of weird stuff in our history and stuff, but you know what? When I go look at these other worldviews, and I don't mean just that they don't feel good. I mean that they don't explain the world that I live in. Like, I'm not a meat computer. Yeah. I am not just a bag of cells that doesn't have agency. Like, there are some things that, like, as sure as I can be sure of, and that just destroys like the atheist side of the equation, and it opens up the possibilities to all sorts of things. And so I'm not walking into this blindly putting my faith somewhere. I'm looking at all of the available options and saying, look, where am I going to place my bet in life? Because I got to live. And agnosticism is a misnomer. It's a cop-out bunch of bullcrap. You can be agnostic in your intellectual. You can say, I'm not 100% confident. And I was like, yeah, congratulations. We're never 100% confident.
Yeah, we're all agnostic in that way.
We're all agnostic in that way. You can't be agnostic in your behavior. You can't be agnostic in your behavior. And so that's why Jordan Peterson is out there saying, I act as though God exists. Because he recognizes that he does. And so the thing is, at some point you place your faith in that God exists.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say that's what faith is. That's why, and this isn't some made up bullcrap thing that I'm just inventing off the top of my head. Go read James. That's what James says. He's saying faith without works is dead, because your faith is manifested by your works.
Yeah.
So
that's so true. In closing off, and we could always continue this another time, but what sort of like your thoughts on those people who are kind of in the middle? Like, I kind of see myself as somebody who is a believer, who wants to believe, who loves so many things about the restored gospel, who loves so many things about the scriptures, who wants to be in the church. And for 22 years of my life, it was all 100% true, loved everything. And then since being back, there can be that cognitive dissonance. There can be that I believe, but I have unbelief. And is there a place for those people who either have faith struggles or doubts, or even people who might even disagree with the church on certain things? Should they be allowed to? Should we be encouraging them to stay in the church? Because some members might see it as, well, if you don't accept everything, or if you have some doubts about thing, maybe you shouldn't come. I'm curious to get your take on it, and then I'd be happy to share sort of my thoughts as well.
So everyone is in that boat to some extent. The question is just how conflicted are you with your faith? How much cognitive dissonance do you have between these different witnesses of truth that are hitting you? My thing is as a Christian, as a Latter-day Saint, I say, stay the course. Place your faith in Jesus Christ. Live. There's no better option. The secondary questions are endless. I think you made a great point with that. They're endless. Figure out the primary ones, which I would say go back to this stuff. These are the primary questions. And then live your life accordingly. And work to try and work these things out. It's okay. But at the end of the day, recognize you're always going to have to place your faith somewhere. And I would encourage them to place their faith in the restoration of the church and to stay. The only time I tell people that I don't think they should be there is when they challenge the very church itself. In other words, they work to undermine the authority of the church. That's what apostasy is. And in that case, I say, look, if you're here to destroy the church fundamentally by taking apart its structure, by saying that the structure is somehow invalid, there's a line that gets crossed to where it is better that that person be outside of the church figuring things out until they can sustain the structure. Because the line, that's why the baptismal questions immediately ask you, do you sustain the brethren? Do you uphold them as the ones who get to make the call? Because if you don't, and you think you get to make the call, you shouldn't be baptized. You're not ready to be part of this level 3 version of Christianity. Because that is what makes the restored church what it is. That is what defines this box. It is the authority structure of the church, the keys of the kingdom.
I would agree with you. I think intent is really important. I think intent matters on if you should stay or not. If your intention is, like you said, to destroy the church or to be sort of like a wolf among the sheep, so to speak, and just hurt people's faith and just protest against, I would tend to agree. And there's some people who would see it as, oh, I have a right to speak my truth. I know for me, as I've been going through my faith struggles, I would feel like it would be wrong for me to publicly speak them at a church meeting. I don't feel that's the appropriate place.
Absolutely.
And I think intent matters as well. And I personally feel, as I've been thinking about this, because there was a time recently where intellectually I was struggling again. And there's part of me that felt that maybe I need to leave the church because intellectually I'm losing my faith and struggling to put together. And I had a very similar experience with prayer, going back to God. And it was more of just a personal feeling. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt like God wanted me to stay. I felt like, despite having all this unbelief, I felt that God wants me to stay in the church and try to confront these things, figure things out. But, Jesus says, or the guy with the son, Lord, I believe, but help mine unbelief. You don't have to know everything or have a testimony of everything. And I feel like God would want you to focus on the faith you do have, and put your faith in Jesus Christ. Like I like that. And people who feel like they have issues with church history or church policy, it's like, okay, like that's okay, but that doesn't mean you have to throw out everything else. I don't think that's what God would want. You know, like when you look at the parable of the lost sheep, like he's going to try to get you and bring you back. You know, if you even if you deliberately leave or you feel like you don't belong, he wants the church to be inclusive of everybody, and we all have different perspectives. We all have different life experiences. We're not all going to agree, but I feel like the Lord wants his church to be include everybody. And I also think that those people with faith struggles, that that's something that Jesus understands. Like I feel like he's atoned for the suffering and the pain you go through in a faith crisis. I believe that's part of his atonement. He understands what you have gone through, what you're going through. And like there's a scripture I really like in, I think it's 3 Nephi 17, where he invites like all the Nephites to come unto him, like those who are like deaf or blind or maimed, and he says, or are afflicted in any manner, like come unto me. And I feel like those who are having faith struggles or doubts or issues, that Jesus would still say to them, come to me, you know, and I can heal you. I have compassion and love towards you. If your intent is you feel sort of broken and you're struggling with your faith, but you still have that desire, that Jesus is still there with open arms. And that's sort of that's my take on it. Those people who feel like they're maybe sort of in the middle or they're struggling with things, I feel like that's what God would say to them is, you know, come to me, include me in your faith journey. I'll help you navigate through those things. And I think intent does matter as well. The desire to believe is important, because I know that there were times whenever I first left the church that I did have a bee in my bonnet, and you know, I kind of just wanted to talk bad about the church, and you know, you feel a bit pissed off and you feel a bit betrayed, and you know, not that I was a really bad person, but I think people have to look into their hearts and really what is their desires. But I feel like God wants us all to come to him.
Absolutely. And I agree 100%. I think that the Lord ultimately wants us to come to him. And I bring that here as we're talking about this in the terms of that Christianity. I believe you become a Latter-day Saint when you truly become a Christian. I think that's when his work begins to shine. And people who keep their faith in Christ, I find that they come back to the church. Those who abandon Jesus Christ, that's where the problem isn't so much the church. The church is a matter of authority structures and things like that. And that matters, and it's important. It's where Christianity is meant to take you. But it's my advice to anyone who's struggling is go back to Jesus Christ. Go back to God. Strengthen that. Spend your time building. It's so easy to be a critic. It's so easy to just point out things. My thing with like somebody like John Dehlin, I ask him like, John, let's flip the tables here. You can critique my religion all day long. Tell me where you are. Tell me where you went into secular humanism or into vague spiritualism. Like, tell me about your theology. Give me the basis for creation. Give me the, and it's like, you'll find that you know how deep they are? They're that deep. These are not serious ideas. And what happens is that when you go back and you spend your time, instead of critiquing, trying to build your worldview and why you believe what you do. And if you go to the gospel, if you become a believer in Jesus Christ and you place your faith there, the restoration can speak. Man, it can speak. But if you don't have that, you got to go back further into the conversation. You got to start questioning who you are. And I think when people do that, they do come back to faith in God. And if you have faith in God, Jesus Christ can speak to you.
Yeah, the door's open.
Exactly. And Christ wants to include everyone, but on his terms, right? And that can be hard. He wants us to leave everything. He wants us to be born again. He wants us to be a new creature. It's so funny how often we forget our Christianity. the message, the basic Christian message is so powerful and so beautiful and so compelling. There's a reason that the majority of people in the world have ascribed to it. And I think people need to get back to that. Quit worrying about Joseph. Quit worrying. I mean, not to say it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, before you tackle that question, make sure you're secure in your Christianity.
Yeah.
Because Joseph is a secondary question to the Christian world. The primary question is, did Jesus Christ rise again on the third day? Was he the Savior of the world? Is the New Testament fundamentally true? Yeah. For me, once I did that, everything changed. It was like, then then my doubts became, the secondary questions became a lot less important. They're interesting and they are important, but it's sort of like those primary questions still are the ones that matter most. And I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, I agree with so much of what you said. And I think this has been a really good discussion. It's probably rare for you to bring someone on. Well, I'm not saying that you're combative, but most of the time it's someone who's disagreeing with you and going toe to toe. And it's actually been nice to just sort of have a discussion without and kind of actually coming together. You know, one last thought I have is one of my favorite chapters in the Book of Mormon is Jacob 6. It's one that I read not so long ago, and one of my favorite verses in it. And it's one that has been meaningful to me as I've been in my sort of faith journey and experiencing faith crisis and trying to overcome things. There's a verse where it says, like, don't harden your heart and cleave unto God as he cleaves unto you, sort of thing. Like, turn to God, because it's very easy to harden our heart. And I felt like I did experience that a bit of resentment, unbelief, frustration, and didn't feel open to spiritual light, spiritual answers. And I think God wants, he wants our hearts to be open and just to be open to have faith in him. And I think your desire, your intent is what matters, and to not close yourself off to him in whatever faith struggles you're going through.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been awesome.